Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Healthy Not Complicated podcast. This is going to be episode 2. And this is going to be episode 2. This is episode 2. Today, we're going to be talking about all things related to insulin resistance. Now, if you guys have been following me on YouTube for a while, if you've been following me on Instagram or anywhere else, you will know that this has been what I specialize in for the last couple of years. It was maybe like 4 or 5 years ago that I realized how common insulin resistance is and just how many people don't even realize they have it. And on top of that is the fact that it is the root cause for so many other symptoms, diseases, and things that people struggle with day to day and long term. And that when you know you have it, because it is caused by diet and lifestyle, you can reverse it through diet and lifestyle. So this is really empowering. But anyways, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. All of that is to say that I am very passionate about insulin resistance and I have a lot to say about it. Usually in the past, I have just done my YouTube videos, which are shorter form content. Usually they'll be between like 8 and 12 minutes long. We'll see how long today's episode goes, because in my YouTube videos, I usually just touch on like 1 or 2 areas of insulin resistance. I usually give a quick recap on what it is, and then kind of get into something that's a bit more targeted, I guess. But today we're going to be covering everything. So I have a few notes on my phone. Let me just pull those up. So we're going to be starting off talking about what causes insulin resistance. Then we'll get into signs and symptoms of it. We're also going to be talking about why insulin injections are actually counterproductive. So if your insulin resistance has progressed to prediabetes, to type 2 diabetes, and you've been prescribed insulin, this is actually making your insulin resistance worse. And this is something that I don't think a lot of people realize. So we're going to get into that as well. Then we'll get into PCOS, which is also related, how to test for insulin resistance, and then ultimately how to reverse it. So you do this mainly through diet and lifestyle. Starting off, what is insulin resistance? Insulin resistance is a condition where the cells in your body are no longer responding to the hormone insulin. So insulin's a hormone, and one of its main roles is that whenever you eat, the carbohydrates in that meal, they are broken down into sugar, they are broken down into glucose. Sugar, glucose, those can be used interchangeably. And this causes your blood sugar, blood glucose to go up when these carbohydrates are broken down. Now, when there is an influx in sugar in your bloodstream, insulin is going to be released because it always wants to keep your blood sugar around a certain level. And when a lot comes in, when your blood sugar goes up, insulin's released in order to take the excess sugar to the cells in your body to use it for energy. This is a good thing, nothing wrong with this. And same thing happens when your blood sugar drops too low. There's hormones that are released to create more sugar and, again, keep your blood sugar level at baseline. So when you're insulin resistant, like I said, your cells are not responding to insulin. So your blood sugar goes up, the insulin takes this excess sugar, it tries to bring it to your cells, but your cells aren't responding to it. So basically what ends up happening is your blood sugar stays high for longer than it should. Usually in someone who's healthy, an hour and a half after they eat a meal that's high in carbohydrates, their blood sugar will go up and it will come back down and should be at baseline at that 1.5 hour mark. If it stays higher for longer than that, then again, this can be a sign of insulin resistance. It can also be due to other things, which we'll talk about later in this video. Like even if you get one night of poor sleep, if you are metabolically healthy and you don't have insulin resistance, your blood sugar and insulin are going to be higher the next day. So this can obviously have an impact on how long it takes your blood sugar to come back down to baseline. But anyways, all of that is to say that if your cells don't respond to insulin correctly, then your blood sugar stays higher for longer than it should. And your pancreas realizes this, it releases more insulin, because it's like, what's going on here? We need to bring this blood sugar down. Why is it not being taken to the cells? And so when this excess insulin is released, then the cells are able to take in the glucose. Basically, what ends up happening now is your insulin levels are high, but your blood sugar looks normal. Your blood sugar can look normal, but you can still be insulin resistant. And this is because, like I said, your pancreas is pumping out this excess insulin, and that is helping to keep your blood sugar where it should be, but it's coming at the cost of your insulin levels being higher than they should be. And it's these high levels of insulin that actually are the cause of a lot of side effects, which we're going to get into in a second. But what causes insulin resistance? What causes our cells to resist it? And this is where it kind of turns into a bit of a cycle. Insulin resistance, your cells resisting insulin, is caused by high insulin levels over a long period of time. So like I said, once you're already insulin resistant, then this leads to more insulin being created. A lot of insulin is needed to process these foods, and it's needed very quickly, especially, like I said, if they are processed, if they're refined sugars. Lots of insulin is needed all at once, and this starts to overwhelm your cells, but it's still able to deal with it. But then over a prolonged period of time where your blood sugar is constantly spiking throughout the day, where your insulin is constantly spiking as a result, because let's face it, most people are not eating just 3 meals nowadays. They're eating 3 solid meals and then snacks in between and then eating late into the night. And if all of these eating times are high in carbs, then think about it. That is a lot of insulin that is needed throughout the day. And especially if we are not giving our bodies a chance for our blood sugar and our insulin levels to come back down before we eat again, then we're in this state where our insulin levels are just constantly high throughout the day. Basically what I'm saying is it's not just one meal you're having or one day of eating that makes you insulin resistant. It happens over a long period of time when you are consistently eating this way. Now, there are other aspects beyond diet that can contribute to high insulin levels and insulin resistance. Obviously, one of them is exercise or lack of exercise. When you exercise, your cells are actually able to take in sugar from your bloodstream without insulin. So this is why exercise is so great for metabolic health, for keeping your insulin sensitivity in a good place. But as we all know, a lot of us nowadays not getting enough exercise. A lot of people are sedentary. So this basically just means that, again, a lot of insulin is needed to manage blood sugar. Another piece of the puzzle that a lot of people overlook is sleep. I kind of touched on this before, but it actually has such a big impact. And so many people just underestimate how much getting proper sleep matters. There's one study I'm thinking of, and I'm pretty sure they got participants to only have 4 hours of sleep for maybe 5 or 6 days. And even after that first night of not getting enough sleep, the whole following day, these people who are normally metabolically healthy, didn't have any insulin resistance, were showing up as though they had insulin resistance. Their insulin levels were higher, their blood sugar was higher the entire next day. And obviously this just got worse as the study went on for the few days. I'm pretty sure by the end of it, some of the participants' blood sugar actually looked like it was pre-diabetic. And the only thing that was different was they were getting not enough sleep. So I think this just goes to show from one day to the next how much these numbers can change. So sleep, that is another really important component. For people who work night shifts, this is really tricky. And I get this question a lot. What can these people do? And it's really tough to answer because There are things that people who work night shifts or work like varying hours can do that will help, but the research is pretty clear that it's never going to be optimal, that these people are at a severe disadvantage if they are working odd hours like this, if they're working some nights, some days, if they're working even all the time at night. It's very difficult to correct for these things. Like I said, some things can be done, and maybe I'll do a whole episode on sleep and night shifts and all of that, because I do have a lot to say about sleep as well. So you guys can let me know in the comments if you would like to see that. But moving on, some of the common signs and symptoms of insulin resistance. Well, I guess first I should get into why insulin resistance is so common, but why so many people don't realize they have it. And I guess I've kind of talked about this, but the reason it gets missed so frequently is because doctors aren't testing fasting insulin. In the early stages of insulin resistance, your blood sugar is still going to look normal, but your insulin levels are going to be high. And it's because this extra insulin is helping to keep your blood sugar where it should be. And the excess insulin will be able to keep your blood sugar in check for 10 to 15 years. And this is usually the point at which it can't keep up anymore. And this is when your fasting blood sugar starts to go up. And this is when you're going to get diagnosed with prediabetes, because fasting glucose, that is something that doctors do routinely test. But if they were testing fasting insulin, then insulin resistance would get caught a lot sooner, a decade sooner. And just think of the impact that could have on people's health if they could catch it this far in the future. This is why a lot of people have insulin resistance and don't realize it. And the reason that we know so many people are insulin resistant is because insulin resistance is the same thing as metabolic syndrome. The pillar symptoms of metabolic syndrome are high blood pressure, high triglycerides, low HDL, high fasting blood sugar, and a large waist circumference. If you have 3 out of 5 of these symptoms, then you will be diagnosed with metabolic syndrome, which basically just means you're at an increased risk of diabetes, heart disease, stroke, etc. But like I said, metabolic syndrome is the same thing as insulin resistance. Metabolic syndrome used to actually be called insulin resistance syndrome. And the fact that so many people nowadays have metabolic syndrome just goes to show how common insulin resistance is. And that is why I am so passionate about this, because a lot of people, they have high blood pressure and they are on medication to treat high blood pressure, but that isn't addressing the root cause. That's just treating the symptom, if that makes sense. If they were to make the necessary changes to improve their insulin sensitivity, then their blood sugar would, or not their blood sugar, their blood pressure would come down as a result. And I think just people don't understand the connection here. People aren't aware of what insulin resistance is. Yes, I know a lot of people in my community are familiar with it because they've either been following me for a while or other people, mainly in the low carb space. A lot of people talk about insulin resistance. But once you step outside of this online bubble, not many people know what insulin resistance is. Not many people, unless they've been diagnosed as pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic or type 1 diabetic, even have any consideration about their blood sugar either. Some of the other symptoms that people will experience when they have insulin resistance include skin tags, sugar cravings after eating, because the body, again, isn't able to properly take in the glucose from your bloodstream. So the energy is there, but your body isn't able to access it. So this causes cravings. So if you or someone you know always needs a sweet treat after eating a meal, this is a sign of insulin resistance. Dark patches of skin around your neck, in your armpits, and your groin, this is also caused by insulin resistance. And symptoms of PCOS. So let's quickly segue into PCOS, which stands for polycystic ovarian syndrome. And this is a condition that affects at least 1 in 10 women worldwide. And it's only seen in women, not in men. But what PCOS is it's kind of like metabolic syndrome, where you have to have 2 out of the 3 main symptoms to be diagnosed with it. So you need to have an irregular period, you need to have high testosterone, and you need to have cysts on your ovaries. So 2 out of 3 of those, and you'll be diagnosed with PCOS. But the vast majority of PCOS cases are caused by insulin resistance. It's something like over 90%. So yes, there are some outliers who have PCOS, who have these symptoms, but aren't insulin resistant, but the vast majority are. So symptoms of PCOS for women include irregular periods, like I said, which also connects back to insulin resistance. I'll get to that in a second. Facial hair and growing hair in areas that women typically wouldn't, such as on their back or their stomach. Acne is another common side effect of insulin resistance and PCOS. So I guess I'll touch quickly on why insulin resistance causes irregular periods for women. As we've said a few times already, when you're insulin resistant, your insulin levels are always high. And when you have high insulin levels, this actually blocks the body from converting testosterone into estrogen. Now, usually about midway through your period, usually about midway through your cycle, just before ovulation, this is when you're going to see a spike in estrogen. But if you have insulin resistance, if you have high insulin levels, then this spike in estrogen isn't happening. And when it doesn't happen, you don't ovulate, and then this causes your period to become irregular. On top of that, because you don't ovulate, you also get cysts on your ovaries. So those are the 3 main symptoms of PCOS. You end up with high testosterone because it's not being converted to estrogen. You end up with an irregular period because you're not ovulating at the same time every month, and you end up with cysts on the ovaries. And all of that is to say is that a lot of women with PCOS don't realize the connection to insulin resistance. A lot of women with PCOS are told that it is a condition that they are born with and that they can't do anything except for manage symptoms, and that they're going to have trouble conceiving and that sort of thing. And I think that this is just, this really upsets me because they're not getting the full story. Because when you improve your insulin sensitivity and reverse insulin resistance, the 3 main symptoms of PCOS will go away or become more regular, if you will. So you're going to start to get a regular period, your testosterone is going to come down, and yeah, this can be corrected by diet and lifestyle changes. Now, I will say that there is a genetic component to both insulin resistance and PCOS. Some people are more predisposed to develop these conditions. However, just because we are genetically predisposed to something does not mean we are automatically. Let's use an example. So let's say there are 2 women. One is predisposed to PCOS. It runs in her family, and the other one isn't predisposed. If these 2 women were both to eat a diet that requires a lot of insulin that eventually will lead to insulin resistance, the one who's predisposed to PCOS will develop it quicker. The other one, it will develop slower. Maybe if the diet isn't that high insulin, then they might not get it ever at all, but they're going to be progressing towards it. But if the same 2 women were to eat a diet that is low insulin, that supports insulin sensitivity, then neither one of them would develop it. There's a quote, and I think it goes something like, genetics load the gun, diet and lifestyle pull the trigger. And this is what I'm talking about. So if you have a lot of the symptoms in today's video, if you find it difficult to lose weight, because that is another really common symptom, I'll just segue into that for a second. The reason it's so hard to lose weight when you have insulin resistance is because insulin is the fat storage hormone. And that isn't a bad thing. Again, basically, like I said, insulin goes up when we've eaten. Wow, I just realized I have been holding my microphone backwards for the last, 10 minutes. So I am going to re-record so this sounds better. But as I was saying, this is why insulin resistance is known as the fat storage hormone, because when we eat, when our blood sugar goes up, then insulin goes up. And this is a sign that there is energy that has just come in and that we don't need to tap into our stored body fat for energy because we've just eaten and this energy is going to be more easy to access. But when we're insulin resistant, our insulin levels are high for long periods of time. We are basically stuck in this fat storage state. Now, when you haven't eaten for a while, this is when insulin levels are going to go down. And this is when you're going to switch over to fat burning mode instead. Because if there's no energy coming in, then your body is going to turn to stored body fat. Now, this isn't to say that insulin is the bad guy, but basically you want to have periods throughout the day where your insulin goes up, and you want to have periods throughout the day where your insulin goes down. If you always have high insulin levels, then it is going to be very, very difficult to lose weight. And like I said earlier, once you become insulin resistant, even if you haven't eaten for a few hours, your insulin levels are still going to remain high because there was excess insulin needed to manage your blood sugar. Now, if you can get your doctor to test your fasting insulin, the test you're going to want to ask for is a HOMA-IR test. And what this tests for is it does your fasting glucose and it does your fasting insulin. And basically, if your fasting glucose is normal, but your insulin levels are high, this just shows that a lot of insulin is needed in order to keep your fasting blood sugar where it is, which signifies insulin resistance. Ideally, you want your fasting blood sugar to be normal, and you want your fasting insulin to be normal or on the lower side as well, because that means it's not taking a lot of insulin to keep your blood sugar in check. The barrier that a lot of people run into when they try to get their doctors to test for this is they don't want to run the test because they, again, don't understand the significance of it. They think that if blood sugar is normal, that there's no point in testing insulin. Oftentimes, it's not covered by insurance, so that, again, is another issue. If your doctor won't test for it, there is one company I work with who they're based in the United States and they have an at-home testing kit where they send you the kit, you do a finger prick to get a sample of blood, seal it up, send it back, and this blood test will test your fasting glucose, your fasting insulin. It also tests your cholesterol. It tests your thyroid stimulating hormone, your B12, a whole bunch of biomarkers that are related to metabolic health. You send it back and you'll get a report based on where your metabolic health is currently at. And this includes your insulin sensitivity or resistance. So if you're in the US, this can be a good option. I will put the link in the show notes or the description box down below. That company is called So Well Health. As far as I'm aware, there isn't another company like this in the United States, in Australia, in Canada that I am currently aware of. Now, there are a few tests that are referred to as the poor man's methods for testing for insulin resistance, and these can definitely be good indicators that you are insulin resistant, but they can also miss it. The first one is your waist to height ratio. So basically you take your waist measurement and your height, you divide the two, and if your calculation comes out higher than 0.53, this is a good indicator of insulin resistance because high insulin levels, they cause you to store fat around your midsection. They cause a buildup of visceral fat. Hello, Zeus. And if you're not watching the video, my cat just jumped up. You can see his tail on screen. Yes. Okay. Oh, now you're distracting me. Where was I? Oh, yeah. So high insulin levels cause a buildup of fat around your midsection. So if you have a large waist circumference in comparison to your height, an indicator of insulin resistance. However, like I said, this test can miss insulin resistance because you can be a normal body weight. You can have not that, don't knock over my ring light, please, Zeus. It's a little wobbly, so you could very easily do that. You can still be insulin resistant and not have a large waist circumference. The second test is going to be your triglyceride to HDL ratio. So if you have a recent cholesterol panel, you can look at your numbers, take your triglycerides, divide them by your HDL, and anything above a 1.9 ratio indicates insulin resistance. Between 2 and 3 is in the early stages, and above 3 is pretty severe insulin resistance. But again, this test can miss it because once you start making diet and lifestyle changes, your cholesterol numbers improve very, very quickly. So if you've already started making some diet changes, then you can have a good ratio, but still be insulin resistant. But as I mentioned earlier in this video, insulin resistance is so common that if you are experiencing a lot of the symptoms related to it, I don't want to say it's not worth getting tested because you should get tested, but if you are having a lot of these symptoms, then it is very, very likely that you are insulin resistant. Now, let's get into the good stuff. What can you do to reverse it? Because as I said before, insulin resistance is a condition of diet and lifestyle, and therefore it can be reversed through diet and lifestyle. The earlier you can catch it, if you can catch it before your blood sugar starts to go up, you are going to have an easier time reversing it. It's not going to take as long. If you are already pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic, then it can take longer to reverse, but it still can be done. The way to reverse insulin resistance is doing the opposite of how it develops. So if high insulin causes insulin resistance, we want to keep our insulin levels low. When we keep our insulin levels low, then our cells become more sensitive to insulin again, and this is how it reverses. So anything we can do to lower our insulin levels, and the longer we can keep them lower throughout the day, the better. The obvious way to do this is to eat less carbohydrates because carbohydrates are the macronutrient that requires the most insulin to process. As we've already said, when we eat carbohydrates, they're broken down into sugar, and this causes blood sugar to go up, and this requires our body to release insulin to take it to our cells. Now, when we consume fat and protein, it doesn't require insulin, or it doesn't require as much. Protein, depending on the rest of your diet, can bump insulin up a little bit, but not as much as carbohydrates. So if you can eat a low-carb diet, if you can reduce your carbs to at least under 100 grams per day, if you want to push it even more, you can go below 50 grams. This is going to be extremely, extremely beneficial for your insulin sensitivity. Other things you can do are, of course, exercising. But when I say this, I don't mean high intensity exercise. I mean building muscle through resistance training or doing low intensity exercise like walking, swimming, that sort of thing. The reason I recommend resistance training is because when you have more muscle, there's more room for your body to store glucose. So with more room for glucose, this kind of just like spreads things out more and helps with your insulin sensitivity. And the reason that I don't recommend high intensity exercise is because, well, there's a few different reasons. High intensity exercise does have a place and a time, but for weight loss and insulin resistance, it isn't ideal. One of the, I won't get too into exercise today, actually. It's complicated, but basically resistance training, low intensity exercise, these are going to be the best for insulin sensitivity. Moving on, the other thing which we also talked about earlier is sleep. It is going to be so much easier for you to reverse insulin resistance if your sleep is in check. Trust me. Give yourself at least bare minimum 7 hours of sleep opportunity every single night. Try to be consistent with your sleep and your wake time. Try to limit blue light exposure after sunset. So don't have bright lights on. Don't be staring at your screens. Wear a pair of blue light blocking glasses. All of these things can help. Be consistent with it. That's also really important for setting your circadian rhythm. This will help to ensure you get good quality sleep and enough of it. So important because, like I said, if you aren't sleeping well, your insulin levels are going to be higher, even if you're not insulin resistant. And if you are already insulin resistant, it's just going to make things even worse. Beyond that, after a poor night's sleep, we actually see changes in our hunger hormones as well. So ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone, which makes you hungry, goes up, and leptin, which is the satiety hormone, goes down. So if you've ever had a really late night and you're confused as to why the next day your stomach feels like a bottomless pit, this is why. And of course, this isn't going to help if we're trying to make healthy choices, choose the right foods, and ultimately reverse insulin resistance. Stress is another factor that can contribute to our insulin resistance. This is very tricky because I know people's situations vary a lot. It can be very hard to give tips on managing stress levels. Doing breath work, though, is one really simple, really affordable, because it's literally free, way to bring your cortisol levels, your stress levels down, which can help to improve insulin sensitivity, because when we're stressed, our blood sugar can go up and our insulin can go up. Obviously not ideal. But again, this can be really hard to give tips for because people's situations just vary. And there are things that are out of an individual's control that could be contributing to stress levels. So my advice here is to just do the best job you can. Really try to dial in your sleep because that's going to help with your stress levels as well. When you start making healthier choices in terms of your food, then this will help too. Just do what you can where you can. Circling back to food, so it isn't just about reducing carbs, because when you reduce carbs, you need to be getting your energy from somewhere. You need to be eating more fat instead. Fat's not the bad guy. Fat doesn't contribute to insulin resistance. Don't fear fat. Fat doesn't make you gain weight. Fat is important. But even more important than fat is getting enough protein in. And this should really be the central focus for all of your meals, whether you're trying to reverse insulin resistance or not. Everyone needs at least 30 grams of protein at every single meal. That is the bare minimum. Ideally, you want to be getting between 40 and 50 grams, but most people are far below this, so I say to start off by aiming for 30 grams. Now, when you start eating enough protein at every meal, this helps to control your appetite. It helps to control cravings. This means you're going to be less likely to reach for a snack in between meals if you're hitting this protein threshold and getting enough protein to meet your needs. Protein helps us to maintain lean muscle mass, which is really important for insulin resistance because, again, if we have more muscle mass, we're able to have more room to store glucose. It's also just really important for overall health, especially as we age. More muscle mass is associated with longevity. It's really, really important. As you get older as well, you're going to be able to be more mobile if you have more muscle mass. And this is also important to consider because as we age, our muscle mass is just going to decrease. So anything we can do to maintain what we have is going to be beneficial. All right, I am going to wrap this up here. I hope you guys found this podcast episode helpful. I'm still getting used to this format because usually, as I said in episode 1, with YouTube videos, I have a script that I've created and I kind of stick to that. I have gaps in my talking. I'll kind of like say a couple sentences, then I'll pause, and in editing, I'll sort of chop that all up. Definitely going to have to do a little bit of that here, but I'm trying to keep it a bit more free-flowing. I have no idea how long this has even gone for because I have had a couple breaks. My cats have distracted me. Oh my God, look at them over there. Hello. But anyways, if you guys are listening to this on Spotify, please leave me a review. That would be really helpful. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you for tuning in. I love my YouTube community. You guys are the absolute best. This is by far my favorite platform. Instagram, TikTok, love, hate. YouTube, you guys are always the best. Thanks guys for watching, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye.